Everest, summit of the world. A world above the world. High, savage, frozen. The mountain is huge, and man is small. But man is here. Man the seeker, the challenger. These will be the first Americans to climb the greatest of mountains. The trail to Everest is long. It begins on the other side of the world, on Mount Rainier, in the state of Washington, where the men of the first American Mount Everest Expedition, under the leadership of Norman Dyhrenfurth, undergo a period of training and testing. They range in age from the middle 20s to the middle 40s. They come from all parts of our country. In their low-level lives, they're business and professional men from many fields, of many interests. But they're also among the top mountaineers of the United States. And here, out of many individuals, there emerges a team. The training continues for strength and endurance. And, well, more strength. Soon to be the difference between life and death becomes the latest in beachwear. More than 2 years have been spent in preparation, assembling the team, assembling the food, clothing, shelter, and climbing gear that the expedition will need on the mountain. And now the adventure begins, around the world, toward the top of the world. Mount Everest, monarch of the Himalaya, stands on the high frontier between Nepal and Tibet. And the jumping-off place is Nepal's capital, Kathmandu. The date is February 1963. Held in a geopolitical vice between India and communist China, the Kingdom of Nepal is a cockpit for the international pressures of our time, but it also belongs to an older civilization, the civilization of historical Asia, Hindu and Buddhist. Earth's highest mountain is part of it. But here it is not known as Mount Everest. It is Chomolungma, the goddess mother of the world. Prayer flags speak the litany of an ancient faith. The eyes of Buddha watch the strangers from the west. In the compound of Kathmandu's Hotel Royal, the expedition checks and sorts its gear. Medical supplies, oxygen apparatus. A total of 27 tons of food and equipment. At road's end, beyond Kathmandu, the long trek begins, with leader Dyhrenfurth and transport officer Jimmy Roberts, the expedition's only Englishman, checking the long lists. Onto the mountain with the climbers will go 37 Sherpas, members of the famous hill tribe that has played so great a part in Himalayan mountaineering. But more than 900 low-level porters are needed for the carry-in to the base of Everest. The distance to be covered is about 180 miles. For most of it, the route runs due east. Then, reaching the home country of the Sherpa people, the area of Solukhumbu, it turns north toward Everest. From Kathmandu to the heart of Solukhumbu will take the marches, 16 days. To the north looms the high Himalaya, roof of the world. But Everest itself will not appear until its challengers are close beneath it. day after day, through endless hours. There are many miles between the head and the tail of the column, and the weight of the loads averages 65 pounds. At each day's end, food and rest. Climbers Jim Whittaker and Dan Doody, Jake Breitenbach and Barry Prather, Lut Jerstadt and Willie Unsold, and already the beards are sprouting. Busiest of all are the team's doctors. Later they'll have their hands full taking care of the climbers, but now their work is largely with the porters and people of the countryside. Up and down and up goes the caravan. A vast millipede, a roller coaster in slow motion. It is a wild, steep trail. Many expeditions have followed it toward the high Himalaya. For 6 of them, before this one, the destination has been Everest, and 2 have climbed it to the top. The British in 1953, the Swiss in 1956. But this is the first time that a full-scale American team has even approached the Lord of Mountains. Toza, the largest village on the route. And it's not only the eyes of Buddha that watch the strangers from the west. In every valley there is a rushing stream. Over every stream a bridge of sorts. Some are high, some low. They're made of chains, of logs, of woven fibers. None is ever inspected. Many collapse or are swept away. Hundreds of porters have already crossed. And then, suddenly, some of the men have fallen onto the rocks and lie stunned. Others, weighted down by their loads, struggle in the torrent, and none can swim. But all are at last pulled out. No one is drowned. And though there are painful cuts and bruises, none is serious. Even here, the expedition has been lucky. But if the luck will hold, no one knows. The trail climbs higher. Kathmandu is about 4,000 feet above sea level. Base camp at the foot of Everest will be at almost 18,000 feet. And still there are bridges, always more bridges. The low types are often washed away in flooding waters, and great care is taken by the expedition to safeguard lives. But for the men of Nepal, it's all old and familiar, all in a day's work. And for the women and children, too. Van passes through Sherpa villages, a Buddhist world of shrines and priests. The trail becomes steep, the air thick, the earth hard. Ahead is the kingdom of snow. Angboche, one of the last outposts of the inhabited world. It's early in the month of March, and the expedition is held up for 5 days by a late winter snowstorm. For the Sherpas, this is normal home country, but most of the Americans are ailing from the altitude, which is already 13,000 feet, and they welcome the chance to rest and acclimatize. The mountain world is close, now looming in dawn light under the moon. And through the next week, the expedition pushes on into the heartland of the Himalaya. Yaks help with the heavy going. Firewood is carried in for use at base camp. The way leads up the white wilderness of the Khumbu Glacier, a realm of ghostly white shapes known as Phantom Alley. The goal is near, very near. And now the Earth leaps upward, higher. Earth's pinnacle, Everest. To Chomolungma, goddess mother of the world. Here is the great trinity that forms the highest mountain mass on Earth. To the right, Nuptse, meaning West Peak. In the center, Lhotse, the South Peak. And to the left, Everest, 29,028 feet above the sea. At its foot, more than 11,000 feet below, is base camp. From here, a route must first be forged up the Khumbu Icefall, a wild labyrinth of ice squeezed between the shoulders of Everest and Nuptse. Camp 1 will, hopefully, be placed at the top of the icefall. Camp 2, the advanced base, up the glaciated valley above it, called the Western Khum. Base camp is established at the foot of the icefall in March at 17,800 feet. For 2 months to come, this will be the world's highest community, with dozens of tents, a well-built kitchen, a sort of Khumbu Plaza on the rock-strewn glacier. A dangerous world waits above, hurling avalanches down in white fury. All eyes are lifted. All hearts beat faster. Now base camp is a going concern. The hundreds of low-level porters have gone down to the valleys, leaving only the climbers and mountain Sherpas, plus the crows. At this height, birds are the only other living creatures. Mount Everest supermarket. And the mess tent. This is the place not only for chow, but for planning the campaign ahead. And the master plan is that Everest will be attacked by 2 separate routes. One will be the route followed by previous expeditions, up the flanks of Lhotse toward Everest's southeast ridge. But the other will be a new one, up Everest's west ridge, never climbed or even attempted. On the lower mountain, all will follow the same route, through the icefall. And there is no more dangerous stretch on the whole ascent, forever rumbling, crumbling in its billion-ton mass. During the second day of climbing, a group of men are threading their way up through the labyrinth when a cliff of ice collapses, roaring down upon their route. It's a thing of blind chance of an instant. When the instant is past, all is stillness again. But when the tiny dots that are the climbers reappear, descending, there is one less than there had been before. John Breitenbach, age 27, of Jackson, Wyoming, lies dead and buried in a tomb of fallen ice. For 2 days, the expedition is inert at base camp, deep in shock, mourning a friend. At base camp, life must go on. The climb must go on. For Jake Breitenbach's sake, if for nothing else. And again, the team sets out for the murderous icefall, carrying logs for bridges, spanning a crevasse, an abyss. Dr. Gil Roberts moves across to make a bridge secure. Beneath him, the ice falls away into a blue cavern, hundreds of feet deep. Now one bridge crosses another. Next comes scientist Jim Lester. Up ahead, an advance team of Lou Jerstad and Dick Pownell spearhead the drive. There's an ice cliff such as this that peeled off and toppled, killing Jake Breitenbach. But there's no way around it, and the climbers tackle it head on, slowly, carefully, using their special equipment and all their mountaineering skills. Down at base, scientific work begins. 5 separate research projects are carried on by specialists in glaciology and solar radiation, and in physiology, psychology, and sociology. The last 3 concerned with the reactions of men under prolonged stress and duress. Here, glaciologist Maynard Miller is recording the duration of time the sun is obscured by clouds. During the approach, smallpox broke out among the expedition porters, and so Dr. Dave Dingman vaccinates the Sherpas. For days and weeks to come, team members and Sherpas will move up and down the icefall, carrying the vast amount of food and gear that is needed to stock the higher camps. Now there are many bridges across the chasms and fixed ropes on the icy walls. Again, there are interested spectators, but these are not crows. These are Himalayan ravens, which the Sherpas call goraks. High in the icefall, there is now a spidery ladder, and on it a Sherpa is giving his all, but breaking the strictest expedition. The rope is literally the lifeline of a climber, survival and death. Not quite Superman, perhaps, but close to it. At last, the icefall has been surmounted, with Camp 1 established at more than 20,000 feet. Overall, the weather's been good, with some afternoon snow. From here on, for a while, the going will be easier, up the long incline of the western Coombe. Coombe, that is spelled C-W-M. It's a Welsh word meaning glaciated valley or basin. It's the name given by the British to this high corridor to Everest. But the Swiss had a better name for it. The Valley of Silence, sealed off from the world by the highest walls on Earth. Plodding on, goggled and hooded, the load bearers move like a file of specters. Halfway up the Coombe, Camp 2, Advance Base. It is now April. The altitude is 21,350 feet, 1,000 feet higher than the top of Mount McKinley, the highest point in North America. But the real climbing of Everest is just about to begin, with 2 advance guards probing 2 routes toward the summit. One will climb up the Coombe and the walls of Lhotse to the South Col, the other up steep slopes, constantly menaced by avalanches, toward the unknown West Ridge. At Advance Base, physiologist Will Siri, deputy leader of the expedition, prepares to analyze a blood specimen, spinning the blood in a centrifuge to separate cells from serum. Most of the climbers have undergone an ordeal at the great heights, and one who has suffered most is cameraman Dan Doody. Now he's been stricken by thrombophlebitis, the clotting of blood in his leg, is being treated by Dr. Gil Roberts. At such altitudes, thrombophlebitis is a killer, and without expert care, Doody might well have died in a few days. As it is, he will get well, but will do no more climbing on Everest. Through most of April, two fierce battles are waged in the White Wilderness above. On the South Col route, Camp 3 is established at the head of the Coombe. Camp 4 high on the Lhotse face. And on April 16th, Lou Jester, Dick Pownell, and two Sherpas reach the col itself at a height of 26,200 feet. On the second front, the West Ridge team establishes Camp 3W for West, reaches the ridge, and pushes onto a site for 4W at more than 25,000 feet. Back at advanced base for a breather, the men of both teams are poised to push on higher. The West Ridge spark plugs Dr. Tom Hornbein and Willie Unsold. South Col climbers Jim Whittaker and Lute Jersted. There are some who feel that the two assaults should be mounted simultaneously, but this would stretch the expedition's resources very thin. Leader Norman Dyhrenfurth must make the major strategic decision. He decides the Col route will come first. This is the way taken by 6 previous expeditions, British, Swiss, and Indian. The way by which the summit of Everest was first reached by Sir Edmund Hillary, and later by 4 Swiss climbers. The only known route to the top of the world. On the frozen heights, oxygen will be literally the breath of life, and Tom Hornbein, designer of the breathing masks, gives the Sherpas instructions on how to use them. Something special will go up with the loads. Up all the way, if it's humanly possible. Barry Bishop of the National Geographic Society prepares to take a picture of Jim Whittaker. Whittaker and the Sherpa Ngombu have been chosen to make the first try for the top. Accompanying them as far as possible will be Norman Dyhrenfurth and the Sherpa Angdawa, with Dyhrenfurth filming. A support team following a day later will be Lou Jersted, Dick Pownell, Barry Bishop, and Gurmi Dorji, and a crew of the best Sherpas carrying loads to the highest camp. Above advanced base, if no storms strike, the climbers will move each day from one camp to another, and on the 5th day will come the bid for the summit. First day, up the white ramp of the Coombe toward Camp 3, at the foot of Lhotse. At 3, the climbers are at about 23,000 feet. From here on, in the thin, bitter air, climbing will be on oxygen. Before leaving, Jim Whittaker gets set. So does his climbing partner, Ngombu. And off they go, up the walls of Lhotse, the long and the short of it. At 6'5", big Jim Whittaker is the tallest man on the expedition. Ngombu is barely over 5 feet, but in strength and endurance, they're well matched, and also in will and desire. It is not simply by lung and limb that men climb to the heights. Only by a tremendous drive of mind and spirit can they force themselves up into this world above the world. Hour after hour, they struggle on. The Sherpa carriers follow after them. Now they've reached Camp 4, high on the Lhotse face, at about 25,000 feet. After a day of toil and hazard, there are compensations to lift the heart. Then on toward Camp 5 on the South Col. Above are two of the most famous features on the route to Everest. Directly ahead, an outcropping of tawny rock known as the Yellow Band. Beyond it, the rugged buttress called by the Swiss the Geneva Spur. Behind the spur is the South Col. And beyond that, the final goal. And now, the Col. A place of rock and ice and howling wind. It has been called the most desolate place on Earth, and also the world's highest junkyard, for it's a ghostly realm of skeletal tent poles, empty oxygen bottles, and other gear abandoned by previous expeditions. Leaving Camp 5 after a night of gales and bitter cold, Big Jim and Gombo set off for the final assault camp. Even with oxygen, the going is desperately hard. Each plodding step is a monstrous effort for body and will. Along with them go Norman Dyhrenfurth and Angdawa and 8 Sherpas, and they will set up the highest tents, Camp 6, as near to the summit as human strength can take them. Now 6 has been pitched, 2 tiny tents on a catwalk in the sky. From 27,500 feet, the climbers look out at Makalu, 5th highest mountain in the world. They are now far above the long ridge joining Nuptse and Lhotse, almost as high as the crest of Lhotse.
This is Camp 6 calling base, or any other camp on the mountain. This is Camp 6. This is Camp 6. Does anybody read us? Over.
Camp 6. Here's base camp, over.
Everything's fine. We're up here in 6. We're fine. We're leaving for the summit tomorrow. Wish us luck. This is Camp 6. Over and out.
With the tents up, 8 of the Sherpas have headed down to the Col, leaving Dyhrenfurth, Whitaker, and the Sherpas Gombo and Angdawa as the 4 occupants of the Earth's highest habitation. Big Jim and Gombo, sharing one of the tents, prepare a meal. But at such altitudes, appetites are sluggish, and what dominates is a raging thirst. Still, they must try to build up their strength. Tomorrow is the day of days. But the signs are bad. Outside, the wind howls like 1,000 demons. During the night, it will grow stronger. And on the morning of May 1st, the peak is boiling in its plume of snow. Those below were sure that there would be no summit attempt that day, but they were wrong. Big Jim and Gombo decide to make their try, and for hour after hour, inch up the battlements of the southeast ridge. For a while, Norman Dyhrenfurth and Angdawa climb after them, but the cold is too bitter, the wind too fierce. Filmmaking is all but impossible. At last, Norman and Angdawa turn back. Jim and Gombo go on alone. And at last, they are there, on top of the world. Jim Whitaker and Navang Gombo. At 1 o'clock on the afternoon of May 1st, Whitaker planted the American flag on the summit, and with it the flag of the National Geographic Society. Then, 20 minutes later, the long descent begins. On the South Col, the support team waits. They see figures descending. But because Big Jim carried no radio to save weight, they do not know what has happened. Then at last they do know. Everyone knows. Everest has been won, and the winners tell their story. How did you feel on top, Jim Whitaker is asked. Not expansive, not sublime, the gaunt man answers. I felt like a frail human being. Now they're still frail, worn worn and battered, seeming to have aged years in a few days. But the big man from the west and the small man from the east have come back to the world with a shining victory. Now everyone is back at base camp, but the expedition is far from over. Great projects are still ahead. There's still the unknown West Ridge to be challenged by Tom Hornbein, Willie Unsold, and their companions. And the South Col route will be tried again by Lute Gjersted and Barry Bishop. For the second campaign, the two assaults must be coordinated. The hope, the dream of the West Ridges is not only to climb Everest by a new route, but to cross over its summit and descend by the South Col. And for this, the Col team must reach the summit on the same day to lead them down. With their high camp still to be established, the West Ridges take off first. Then the South Col team follows. And for both Gjersted and Bishop, it's a tremendous demonstration of desire and will. For both have just come down from the Col, and now they must climb all the way back and farther. More than 11,000 vertical feet if they are to make the top. For the West Ridges, here is their challenge. If they can find a way, it will be one of the great climbs of history. But first they must regain the ridge by the route they reconnoitered a month ago. There are now 5 climbers on the team: Willie Unsold, Tom Hornbein, Barry Corbett, Dick Emerson, and Al Orton. And a while before they had only a skeleton crew of Sherpas, they now have a full platoon. Their first objective is Camp 3W beneath the ridge. But to reach it, they must break trail through deep, fresh snow that at any moment can plunge in avalanches down the mountainside. Now they've reached 3W and are digging out the tents that have been buried by storms. A pause for refueling, this time not with oxygen. Above 3W, the climbers reach the West Ridge. The moment they move to the left of it, they are in Tibet, meaning Communist China, and their passports are no longer valid. From this side, 7 gallant but unsuccessful attempts on Everest were made by British expeditions in the 1920s and 30s. On the heights above, the famous climber George Mallory vanished forever. Now the team has gained its previous high point of more than 25,000 feet. It works at the pitching of the 3 tents that will be Camp 4W. Above, the West Ridge is no longer snow, but rock. How they will surmount it, no one knows. But at least they are already high, halfway between advance base and the summit. Almost as high as Nuptse, across the gulf of the Western Coombe. But their hopes are soon to be shaken. For as evening closes in over the high camp, Everest shows its teeth. The wind rises, it becomes a gale. And during the night, 2 of the 3 tents at 4W are torn from their moorings, and with 6 men in them, roll down the mountainside. They roll only 100 yards and stop. And miraculously, no one is hurt. The next morning, the tents are a shambles. The wind is still raging. Instead of going higher, the West Ridges are barely able to retreat to Camp 3W, where for 3 days they will try to regain their strength and momentum. And meanwhile, the other assault team launches its push up the Coombe, up the Lhotse Face, to Camp 3, Camp 4, toward Camp 5 on the South Col. On the Col route, Barry Bishop plods on. Lou Jersted is behind the camera, and 3 Sherpas help carry the loads. They cross the yellow band. Ahead is the Geneva Spur. A day behind them, Dr. Dave Dingman and the 2 Sherpas follow in support. Now the advance team has reached the Col. Warned by their earlier efforts, mere skeletons of themselves, they're barely able to push themselves on. The mere act of breathing, said Bishop, made me feel as if my ribs were being torn from my side. In spite of the storm, the 2 assaults are still coordinated. The West Ridges are working their way back from 3W to 4W. Slowly, for though the weather is cleared, they too are tired and buffeted, very close to the limits of endurance. They reach the ruins of 4W. They fight for breath. They rebuild and salvage. Originally, it was the plan that there would be 2 West Ridge summit teams and 2 camps above 4W. But now there's enough time left for only a single desperate attempt by 1 team of 2 with 1 higher camp. For any day now, the monsoon will blow up from India with its warm, wet winds, turning the peak into a death trap of soft, new snow. But they will make the try. Having decided that the West Ridge itself is now impossible, they move out onto the adjoining north face, find a long, steep gully, and follow it upward. There are 10 of them, Unsold, Hornbein, Emerson, Corbett, Oten, and 5 Sherpas. And every step they take is on terrain where no man or living creature has ever trod. At 27,250 feet, they stop and pitch Camp 5W, a single tent. From their perch in the sky, they look down on Tibet. Then Corbett, Orton, Emerson, and the Sherpas descend, leaving Unsold and Hornbein to spend the night at 5W. In the morning, these 2 will struggle up toward the summit, and if they make it, try to descend the other side toward the South Col. If all goes well, Jersted and Bishop, coming up from the Col, will meet them. On the Col, the others make ready. In the junkyard, there are dozens of empty oxygen bottles, but precious little left for climbing. Yet on they go toward Camp 6, Bishop, Jersted, and 2 Sherpas, through the wind and cold. Climbing is scarcely the word for what they're doing now. They're barely creeping. 5 breaths to a step, then a rest, then more steps, more breaths, bodies aching, minds numb. It is now 3 weeks since Camp 6 was set up by the first summit climbers, and there's no way of knowing if the tents will still be there after the winds and the storms. If not, all is lost. But the tents have held firm. They are still there. For the Sherpas, it's a great moment, for their work is done and they will descend to the col. But for Bishop and Gersted, climax and ordeal are still ahead. Comes a moment of truth, Lou Gersted said, when I feel like a little boy humbled before this huge mountain, knowing I'm in the wrong place. And on the morning of May 22nd, they launched the final push, as alone as two human beings can be on the face of the earth. They hope that Unsold and Hornbein are climbing too on the far side of the mountain, but they have no way of knowing. They can only toil on themselves through the hours. Endless hours. Even with their flow of oxygen, they can barely breathe. They can barely move their leaden feet. But still they do move. Made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And then, before them is a sight to lift the heart and bring tears to the eyes. After 3 weeks, Jim Whittaker's maypole still stands fast, with old glory streaming in the winds of space. These are the first moving pictures ever taken from the summit of Everest. Gersted has his camera propped on the head of his ice axe, and the blur at the bottom is his furry glove. Now a blast of wind strikes the earth, quakes, Lute almost falls, and then steadies himself and completes his panorama. They have won their victory. They are filled with a great surge of joy and gratitude. But beneath them is the endless descent. And it is one thing to climb Everest, another to come down from it alive. Also, they've seen no sign of Willie Unsold and Tom Hornbein, nor have those below seen any signs of them. The hours pass. Day fades toward evening. And still the heights hold their secret. Have the 4 men met disaster? Are they lost? The answer will not be known until they have accomplished a great feat and suffered a great ordeal. At 4:15 in the afternoon, Gersted and Bishop started down from the summit, but they were now at the last limits of their strength and did not get far before darkness closed in. Meanwhile, for 11 long hours, West Ridge's Unsold and Hornbein had battled their way up the north face above Camp 5W. And at last, just before sunset, they too came to the flag streaming on the summit of the world. In the fading light, they spent only 15 minutes on top. Then began the descent toward the South Col. Soon it was night, but they kept groping down, and in the blackness they shouted, hoping that their voices might be heard below. Faint voices came back to them, guiding them down. And at 9:30, they joined forces with Gersted and Bishop. Then the 4 went on together, until after midnight, when darkness and exhaustion forced a halt, sinking down on an outcrop of rock at 28,000 feet. They waited for morning. On all but a few nights in a whole year, they would have died in the cold and wind. But this was one night in 100. The mountain was merciful. The night was still and windless. And in the morning, they were again able to move down. On the way, they were met by their support team, and on they came. Now they have reached Camp 1, at the head of the icefall. They've won a great victory, but paid a price for it. Willie Unsoul's feet are frozen, and so are those of Barry Bishop and Lute Gersted. But still, they all reach base camp under their own power. It's a great moment as they arrive. Now the descent to the lowlands begins. Gersted, Bishop, and Unsoul are unable to walk, only Hornbein escaping without frozen feet. A radio message has been sent to Kathmandu asking that a helicopter be sent to one of the Sherpa villages at 12,000 feet. And now the 20th century has reappeared. Unsoul and Bishop will be flown out. Gersted's feet are better. He'll be able to walk out with the others. But for Unsoul and Bishop, the frostbite is severe. After a long siege in the hospital, they will both lose their toes. As Barry Bishop himself has said, on Everest, there are no true victors. There are only survivors. In an hour, Unsoul and Bishop will be in Kathmandu. The others, led by Norman Dyhrenfurth, will march out to the world of the lowlands. Behind them, Everest recedes. The adventure is over. But for those who climbed it, those who did battle on Mount Everest, it was more than an adventure. It was a challenge, a dream, a vision. The adventure is over. The vision